WNBA owners could be forcing Adam Silver to dismantle the WNBA.
The WNBA could be facing its most serious crisis in decades, and it has nothing to do with a lack of attention, star power, or cultural momentum. In fact, the timing is deeply ironic. This moment of instability arrives precisely when women's basketball is more visible, more discussed, and more culturally relevant than it has ever been.
Of the WNBA, the players will move. Yep. There's not going to be a fixed number. It doesn't make sense to me for the WNBA to demand that, for the players to demand that right now.
Ratings are up, attendance is rising, and storylines are finally breaking into mainstream sports conversations. Yet the greatest threat to the league's future isn't external indifference. It's internal conflict, as labor negotiations threaten to undo years of slow, fragile, hard-earned progress. Right now, while fans are focused on highlights, rivalries, and the emergence of a new generation of stars, WNBA owners are having conversations behind closed doors that few people want to acknowledge publicly. These discussions aren't about minor adjustments or symbolic concessions. They aren't just about tweaking a collective bargaining agreement or smoothing over short-term disagreements. They are existential in nature. They center on long-term viability, financial sustainability, and whether the league's current structure makes sense in its present form.
I understand. The biggest thing they did wrong, they said this is their moment. And so they've put a lot of pressure on themselves to make huge changes in the collective bargaining agreement because this is their moment.
In some rooms, the question isn't how to fix the model. It's whether the model can survive at all. Adam Silver finds himself caught in the middle of the most complicated moment women's professional basketball has ever faced. Officially, he is not at the negotiating table, and technically that is true. But in practical terms, he is watching closely as NBA owners, who subsidize the WNBA, run financial projections and reassess their tolerance for continued losses. These owners are not just basketball fans or cultural advocates. They are business operators responsible to partners, boards, and investors. And they are asking a simple but uncomfortable question. How much longer can this structure continue as it is? The latest proposal from ownership was not small, symbolic, or dismissive. It represented a fundamental shift in how WNBA players are compensated and how the league envisions its future labor model.
Player is a free agent. All of them want money and need money. If you have a well-capitalized and well-funded business, the way Project B may be, that could be the end of the WNBA.
The offer included maximum salaries approaching $1 million, with average salaries projected around $417,000, more than double the current average of roughly $200,000. On top of that were performance-based incentives that could push top earners well beyond those figures, along with expanded benefits and revenue-sharing mechanisms designed to align player compensation with future growth.
What I'm telling you is that if the players get too greedy, it will be the end of the WNBA. And that's not the end of the world for them because they have options.
In historical terms, it was the most aggressive and transformative compensation proposal the league has ever put forward. The players rejected it overwhelmingly. Nearly 98% voted no. That vote didn't just reject a proposal, it fundamentally changed the tone and trajectory of the negotiations. From the owner's perspective, this was no longer a matter of refining details or finding middle ground. It was a signal that the conversation had shifted from compromise to confrontation. And when negotiations reach that stage, businesses don't simply negotiate harder. They begin calculating alternatives. They evaluate risk, downside scenarios, and exit strategies that may have previously seemed unthinkable. Here's the uncomfortable truth at the center of this standoff, one that neither side can afford to ignore. The WNBA has lost money for most of its existence. Not small, temporary losses, but hundreds of millions of dollars collectively over nearly 3 decades. The league has survived not because it was financially self-sustaining, but because NBA ownership groups believed in it as a long-term investment in women's sports, cultural equity, and future growth. That belief kept the league alive through years when profitability was not even a realistic goal. But investments, even mission-driven ones, eventually face a reckoning point. And that point may be arriving now. Players are demanding NBA-style revenue sharing, 50% or more of league revenue. On paper, that sounds fair, logical, and aligned with broader conversations about labor rights in professional sports. In practice, it ignores basic economic reality. The NBA generates more than $10 billion annually, providing a massive revenue pool to divide. The WNBA, by contrast, is celebrating its first seasons approaching break-even territory. You cannot divide revenue that does not meaningfully exist. You cannot split losses and call it progress. Until sustained profitability is achieved, revenue sharing remains more theoretical than practical, and forcing it prematurely risks destabilizing the very foundation the league is trying to build. This is where the conversation gets uncomfortable, but necessary. Switching commissioners won't fix this problem. Kathy Engelbert may or may not survive this negotiation, but her departure wouldn't suddenly change viewership patterns or casual fan engagement. Ratings spikes are real when stars like Caitlin Clark play, and they fall sharply when those stars are absent. That isn't bias or disrespect. It's data. The league's current economic engine relies on a small number of players driving interest. At the same time, those very players are operating as part of a labor group pushing demands that may exceed what the league can realistically sustain in its current financial state. That contradiction sits at the heart of the dispute. The players see growth, momentum, and cultural relevance. Ownership sees balance sheets, long-term losses, and unresolved structural issues. Both perspectives are valid on their own, but when they collide without compromise, the entire system becomes unstable. There is another layer to this situation that hasn't been widely discussed outside of executive circles. Every WNBA player is effectively a free agent during these negotiations. That reality creates a level of volatility the league has rarely faced. In theory, it opens the door for an alternative women's basketball league backed by deep-pocketed investors who see opportunity in disruption. If someone wanted to start fresh, bypass legacy debt, and lure top talent with guaranteed money, this would be the moment to do it. That possibility is not just hypothetical, and it's one reason Adam Silver is paying close attention to every development. Folding the league and rebuilding under a new structure, while drastic, is an option owners quietly analyze when negotiations reach an impasse and traditional solutions no longer seem viable. The players believe this is their moment, and they've said so publicly. They point to rising attendance, increased media coverage, the massive impact of Caitlin Clark's rookie season, and a wave of young stars entering the league as proof of leverage. From their perspective, the timing feels perfect. What may be getting lost in that confidence, however, is the critical difference between attention and profitability. Viewership is up, social media engagement is up, interest is up. But sustained profit is not the same thing as momentum, and enthusiasm does not automatically translate into financial stability. Ownership, to its credit, has shown willingness to negotiate in areas that directly affect players' quality of life. Housing assistance, retirement packages, healthcare benefits, and other structural improvements have been put on the table. These are tangible costs that can be modeled, projected, and absorbed over time as the league continues to grow. What owners are unwilling to do is lock themselves into fixed revenue percentages while the league is still operating in the red. That stance isn't rooted in greed or indifference. It's rooted in basic financial survival. No business can promise to share profits it has not yet consistently generated. Strategically, the players' union may have overplayed its hand. By framing this negotiation as an all-or-nothing moment, they've dramatically narrowed the range of acceptable outcomes. That approach leaves little room to claim incremental victories, even if those victories represent meaningful progress. Labor history shows that sustainable gains are typically achieved through multiple agreements over time, not through a single maximalist demand. When everything hinges on one outcome, compromise becomes politically difficult, even when compromise is clearly the rational path forward. Experts close to the negotiations have begun saying the quiet part out loud. If the players do not soften their stance on revenue sharing, the league could legitimately shut down, not as a scare tactic or negotiating bluff, but as a calculated business decision. Wealthy owners will tolerate losses for a mission they believe in, especially one tied to social progress and long-term growth. But belief has limits, and when those limits are reached, even well-intentioned investments can come to an abrupt end. This standoff is unfolding at the worst possible time for women's professional basketball. The sport is finally experiencing genuine, organic growth rather than manufactured hype. Rivalries feel real again. Games carry weight. The talent level across the league is deeper than it has ever been. And for the first time in years, casual fans are paying attention not out of obligation, but out of genuine interest. Momentum like this is rare, fragile, and incredibly difficult to rebuild once it's lost. Yet instead of highlights, playoff races, and championship conversations. The public narrative has been overtaken by labor disputes, financial ultimatums, and existential questions about the league's future. There is also a fundamental power imbalance in this situation that cannot be ignored. NBA owners can survive without the WNBA. For most ownership groups, it represents a side investment, a developmental project, or a long-term vision rather than a core business. Their primary assets, NBA franchises, are worth billions and continue to generate massive revenue. WNBA players, on the other hand, rely on the league as their primary domestic platform. It is the main stage for their careers, their visibility, and their endorsement potential within the United States. If the league collapses, overseas opportunities may remain, but the American platform disappears, along with the visibility that fuels long-term growth. What we are witnessing now is a classic game of chicken, with both sides convinced the other will ultimately blink. Players believe owners will not dare fold a league that has finally begun to receive positive press, cultural support, and mainstream attention. Owners believe players will not walk away from compensation offers that dramatically exceed anything the league has historically provided. Both assumptions cannot be correct. Someone is miscalculating the other's tolerance for risk. And when that miscalculation becomes clear, the consequences will not be abstract or symbolic. They will be immediate and severe. There are only 3 realistic paths forward from this point. The first is compromise. The players accept a modified version of the current proposal. Ownership makes targeted concessions, and both sides publicly claim victory while privately acknowledging the need for patience. The second is escalation. Owners lock out the players. A season is lost, and trust between the two sides erodes further. The third is the nuclear option, where the league dissolves entirely and investors explore whether a new structure, brand, or organization can be built from the ground up. These are not hypothetical outcomes. They are the actual scenarios being discussed behind closed doors. The real tragedy is that none of this was inevitable. Women's basketball did not need to arrive at this moment of potential self-destruction. The product on the court is strong. The competition is real. The growth, while uneven, was genuine. But labor negotiations do not reward emotion, timing, or public sentiment alone. They reward realism, patience, and an understanding of what a system can support at a given moment. This situation is larger than any single player, rivalry, or season. These negotiations will define the WNBA's trajectory far more than attendance records or rookie hype ever could. They will determine whether the league continues its gradual climb or resets entirely. And right now, the warning signs are flashing clearly for anyone willing to look beyond the headlines. The question isn't whether someone will blink, it's whether there will still be a league standing when they do.